So good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this PSI webinar. On the topic for this afternoon is patient engagement in clinical trials. I want to say thank you to Andrew Holmes and Paul Terrell for helping me as members of the scientific committee in putting this webinar together. And of course warmly welcome our two speakers for today, Dr. Kathy Emmis from AstraZeneca and Professor Sue Pavit from the University of Leeds. We'll be getting underway very shortly. Just before we do, just to highlight to people a few more PSI events that are coming forward in the near future. And then just a quick word about questions for the speakers. So we've allocated about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of each presentation for questions. If you want to ask a question, and we encourage you to do so, please could you type that in the questions box on the webinar, and then that will be made available to us to put the questions to the presenter at the end of the presentation. So if you could do that, then that would be brilliant. So as I say, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Kathy Emmis from AstraZeneca. Kathy is the Partnership Director in AstraZeneca's Global Patient-centricity team, where she leads a 5-year strategic collaboration with the Patients Like Me online health network. Those of you that were at the PSI conference, not the recent one, but the year before, will have heard a bit about Patients Like Me from the talk from Paul Wicks. But Kathy's now going to talk to us a little bit about how we actually use that data in the design of clinical trials in practice. So I'm going to hand over now to Kathy for our first talk.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you see my screen correctly?
Yes, I can.
I just need to, are you seeing the webinar on the right-hand side? I'm not sure whether people can see that.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, just checking the webinar piece isn't sitting over the top of my slides. Please let me know if it is. Well, first of all,
it's not, no.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to this group. What I'd like to do today is to tell you a little bit about patient centricity in AstraZeneca and how we've brought the online communities, in particular Patients Like Me, into how we develop a plan and deliver our clinical trials. And patient centricity is very much a buzzword at the moment, and when our team, the patient centricity team at AstraZeneca, was created just over 2 years ago, we looked at the definitions and we felt there were so many, it was really hard to work out which one was the one that was most relevant to patients. So we actually started with patients, and through focus groups and running a survey with over 1,000 patients in the US and Europe, we developed, with their help, a definition of patient centricity with patients, which was, as on the screen, is putting patients first in an open and sustained engagement to respectfully and compassionately achieve the best experience and outcome for the person and their family. And this was slightly different from where we started, which showed the value of actually asking patients what's important. So what does that mean for clinical trials? Well, it means that we need to be developing medicines that patients value, that deliver something that's important to them, that they want to take. And it also means that we need to be delivering fast, efficient studies that bring our medicines to patients quickly, and studies that patients actually want to participate in, they want to join, and they want to stay in these studies. And if you're interested in that definition, it's recently been, our approach that's been recently published in BMJ Innovations. So understanding that we need to work with patients, how do we, when do we start co-creating research with patients? And the answer is throughout the clinical trials process, in fact throughout research and development. So in terms of planning, what is the unmet patient need? What's most important to patients? What are the outcomes that actually matter to them? And then as we move into design, the visits that are required, the location, the frequency, the length of those visits, the procedures that we expect patients to undergo to deliver the study, and the assessments both by physicians and self-assessments by patients to understand what they mean, what impact they have on patients. When we turn to delivery, we want to make sure we're giving patients the right information. We want to reduce their burden, enhance their experience, and also support engagement. And how do we know what to do? We need to ask patients. And at the end, we need to assess the patient experience. What worked and how can we improve it so that future studies, both in the same area and in different diseases, can be improved and made more patient-centric. So this information can come directly from patients in a number of ways. It can come from patients in patient advocacy groups or organisations. It can come from focus groups that we create specifically for a study or disease area. But a new way to interact directly with patients is through online communities. And patients and all citizens have been increasingly seeking information online over the last 10 to 15 years. And that information can come through expert resources provided by ourselves as pharma, by medical organisations, commercial organisations and patient organisations. But over the last 7 years, there's been an increase in the growth of online health communities. And these can be as simple as a Facebook group which somebody sets up around a particular condition and reaches out to their connections and shares their experience. Or it can be formal commercial organisations that set up online health communities to help support patients and also as a resource for research. And the difference between the expert resources and the peer-to-peer online health communities is patients are not just looking for formal information, they're asking advice. What did you do? How did you cope? They share experiences and they also give each other emotional support. One of the most common reasons why patients join online communities is hope. They're looking for an answer, looking for someone who's been through something they've been through before and can give them reassurance that things are going to turn out well. So AstraZeneca 2 years ago formed a 5-year collaboration with the Patients Like Me online community. And this isn't just a vendor relationship. We are actually we have a joint mission and we're looking to build a network with patients that has a positive impact on our R&D. It actually improves patients' lives and transforms healthcare decision making. We've got 3 main goals, the first of which is what I'm going to concentrate on today, is involving the patient as a partner in research and development. But we're also hoping to help patients navigate and drive their own healthcare journey and raise patient experience to the level of evidence. So far, the past 2 years, we've had access to the voice of over 500,000 patients in the online Patients Like Me community. And we've already connected our internal AstraZeneca teams, not just in clinical research, but across the life cycle of our products to more than 70,000 patients through surveys and data that's shared. Patients Like Me, an online community set up in 2004 by 2 brothers in response to their own experience of their brother Stephen's ALS, motor neuron disease. And in 2011, they opened it up so patients with any condition could join their community. There are a wide range of conditions where patients have joined Patients Like Me, and there are a few that are very well populated and are very strong in terms of both the data and the community to gain insight from. And they're also working with a range of partners, including ourselves and other pharma companies, and also innovators in healthcare development. And the aim of their company is to improve the life of patients. Many other online communities, similarly commercial, are set up in a different way in order to help patients, but this was set up specifically from a patient's family perspective, so carers of patients and what they wanted to know and what they would have liked to have found when their brother was initially diagnosed, a way to find out more about his condition and what he could expect. So Patients Like Me is a large community. It's international, but it's English language only, and over 80% of the patients are from the US, with about 10% from the UK and a slightly lower proportion from Canada, and then very low numbers from other countries. And the difference between Patients Like Me and many other online communities is that they encourage patients to share data, not just their experience, but actually structured data. When they were diagnosed, when they had their first symptom, the symptoms and the severity of those symptoms, their quality of life, treatments they've tried, and their evaluation of those treatments and their side effects. And with strong scientific focus, they've had a large number of publications and have been working with their own data over the last 10-15 years and can support us very well in interpreting this data and using it correctly. For the patients themselves, this data they share, they can see online, and they can use this also to see patients who are similar to them in terms of their diagnoses, their symptoms, and connect to others who are patients like them. And they see summaries of data enabling them to track their own conditions and see improvements and see what may be triggering their conditions. So it's useful to patients. It's also very useful to us as a research resource. Patients Like Me is obviously not the only online community, and when we need to work with patients from outside the US or non-English language, or in conditions where they're not well represented in Patients Like Me, then we do use other online communities, and examples of those are Serenity in Europe, Health Unlocked in the UK and some South American countries, and Inspire in North America, which is particularly strong in oncology. So we have a preferred provider because of the structured data and our collaboration, but there are other online communities where patients share information on fora, but there's no structured data. So I'm now going to focus on what we do with Patients Like Me. So there are a number of different approaches that we can make. We can just start with the data that patients have already shared, and we can look at that to inform decision making. What matters to patients? What are they sharing on the platform? Which symptoms are they mentioning? Which symptoms are most severe? And how do patients describe their disease? What sort of terms do they use? And certainly they're often very different from those terms that a doctor or an academic would use around the condition. We can use it to support planning, randomized trials or non-interventional studies by seeing the symptoms patients are recording, the frequency, the treatments they're already on. And we can also use this for formal research with the aim of generating real-world evidence. So that's starting from what patients are spontaneously recording on the Patient Like Me platform. A second approach, where the information we need isn't already being shared, is through surveys and interviews. Ethnographic interviews, so deep one-on-one interviews, a much deeper understanding of the patient experience, the patient journey with their disease, and also the day-to-day problems that patients encounter and what they want us to change, what they want to see us do. And we can do this with the Patients Like Me population, and they deliver that as a service. And we can also check their opinions on clinical trials. And we often do this, and I'll come to this later, is through surveys. So these can be deployed to a large number of patients, and we can ask about patients' opinion of different aspects of studies, both the design, the material, the delivery, etc. We're also using surveys increasingly to do exit surveys from studies to bring back in the information about patient experience to help us improve our future studies. And we have a project called TrialMark with Patients Like Me to develop an exit survey which is intended to be used by any pharma company. And we can also understand the patient need for apps support, either in trial or in disease management. So rather than asking patients necessarily their opinion on something the company has already developed, we can ask what do they need and what would they value in advance to guide our development. What we're also beginning to do is create the innovative projects that go beyond that original model of Patients Like Me as an online community where patients discuss their disease via forums and share data in a structured environment. We're also looking to see whether we can bring in other data sets such as electronic health record and registry data. We're looking to see how wearables and digital devices would interact with data patients share on the platform. And we're looking to use the Patients Like Me community to give online support to improve patient engagement and retention in observational and clinical trials, and also to provide an avenue for patients to engage post-study when they've completed their clinical trial observational study, a community where patients can continue to share health data and contribute to research. As part of our collaboration with Patients Like Me, once a quarter we received an anonymized version of the structured data that patients share via the website. And our in-house health informaticians have created some standard dashboards which we can use to explore the data at a very top level, but just to get guidance around what we could expect to find. For instance, the most commonly reported symptoms for particular diseases, the most severe symptoms patients are reporting, which treatments have patients tried, how long did they stay on those treatments. So we can get some and what are the comorbidities with different conditions, and these can give some very good basic information which supplements the epidemiology, and this is not an epidemiology data set, but what it does tell us, rather than the proportion of patients who have a particular, for instance, comorbidity, it tells us a number of patients with a condition who think a comorbidity is important. It's important enough in their lives to record it, and therefore it gives us a different insight to disease demographics than we would receive via, for instance, electronic health records. But we can also get our health informatics team to create bespoke dashboards and analyses, which is something which we're increasingly using as we look for outcomes that matter to patients. And an example of where we're trying to identify what are the outcomes that matter to patients was a project for a study for biologics in rheumatoid arthritis. And the team planning a phase 3 study, they were looking for patients who'd already failed on one or more biologic. And they really wanted to understand, in patients who'd used biologics, what are the symptoms that matter in RA? And in particular, the patients on biologics, is there something different that they're noting? What biologics have they tried, and what sort of order, and what do the patients think the reasons are for changing drugs? And some of the insights that were generated when this data from Patients Like Me was pulled together was that one thing that was pulled out was that fatigue is a key symptom, in addition to the pain that was already very clearly important in rheumatoid arthritis. And we saw some odd things in the switching pattern, which suggested that whilst patients might have started following national guidelines for treatment sequencing, that began to fall apart as they moved on between multiple therapies and were seeking increasingly quickly a therapy that would impact their disease. And it gave us some good indication of what the timing was of this sort of change to enable our, to optimize our recruitment approach. The next example is really pulling together both that structured data that patients have shared, but also what can be gleaned from the conversations that they're having in free text, both conversations on fora, but also what patients will share in their own personal blogs within the PLM platform. And in terms of this particular study looking in lupus, they were, it was quite clear that pain is important in these patients, but again, fatigue is very important, and a lot of patients were noting this, but also the severity of that fatigue was often higher than the pain that most physicians were focused on in terms of trial outcomes. But we also looked at, with Patients Like Me, analysis of how patients described their disease. And in terms of when their disease got worse, it's often described as a flare. But patients, when they were talking about it, were talking about pain and fatigue. They were talking about flare, but not in the way that a physician would describe as a flare. And there was, therefore, in designing the trial, it was very important to make sure the language that was used with patients reflected the way that patients actually discussed their own disease. And we also were able to run surveys with these patients to help us refine the design of the clinical trial itself. We started off with the data that was already shared. We looked also at what were the discussions that were happening in the forum, the sort of language that was used. And as trial design was being developed, we actually began to ask patients for their opinion on our trial design and the impact it might have on them. And we now have, as a regular service within the company, we're able to support clinical trials team by running online surveys with the Patients Like Me community where there are sufficient patients with a particular condition. And we start off by asking their overall willingness to participate in studies, and then we give a short description of the study and check their willingness to participate in this study as it's described. And then we check with the major aspects of the study, the treatments, whether it's randomized, the procedures, the visits, do they have to stop particular medication, and understand what impact that has on their willingness to participate, what makes them more likely, what makes them less likely, what are the showstoppers, what absolutely means they won't participate. And we also ask them to make suggestions, what would help them, what would make them more willing to join the study, what would help them stay in the study if they did join. And we then able to give recommendations back to the study team on how to modify the study or things that they'll need to put in place to help reduce the risk of patients not participating or dropping out of the study once they understand what are the particular concerns of patients with this condition. One of the first examples of this approach was actually with an observational study which was planned for respiratory patients, asthma and COPD. And a long study with relatively little interaction or additional requirements of the patients in terms of responses, but we really wanted to understand how acceptable the study was to patients and also their willingness to participate in a sub-study with a greater requirement of the patients. And the process is identifying what the key questions with the study team, where do they think the problems might be, deploying the survey to the patients, analysis of responses, and then that study report back to the study team, and this takes around 7 or 8 weeks to deliver. And for this particular study, we found more than 3/4 of patients were quite happy with the design. They thought the burden was low, and they were very interested in the sub-study with sensors, and they also were very willing to have more frequent patient-reported outcomes. We found some particular areas of patient concern, which were actually not study-related, but just general areas of concern to do with confidentiality and transparency around the study. And we found some factors which would increase willingness to participate, and the study team were able to put some of those into place. We've now conducted these clinical trial optimization patient preference studies in 9 different studies, and on this slide you can see some of the examples of how clinical trials have changed in response to what we've heard from patients, and some of them were flexibility of enrolment or timing of visits, procedures that could be removed, study visits where the complexity of the early part of the study was a real problem for patients, reducing some patient-reported outcomes, frequency of tests, and finding a less invasive option for a biopsy. Obviously, the changes you can make to a study, particularly a regulatory submission study, may be limited, and often the things that patients would make it easier for patients are actually things that are in your control now. Making sure that the study sites have best practice to be patient-centric, perhaps giving them tools for patient reminders and visit planning, simplifying informed consents, and extra information online for patients to help support them through the study. And then simple things around making it easy to get reimbursement for travel costs, visit planners, and again at the end asking patients how well it's gone and how we can improve studies. As well as in clinical trials themselves, we've actually asked patients' views on informed consent as we developed a simplified informed consent form. What was around clarity of information, what's not helpful, what should we take out, and what's missing, what would help patients. And some of these are obvious, but some not so much. What's missing? A simple flowchart to tell them what to expect at each visit. Something that might be very simple, but might not be in a very long informed consent if it's been created with an eye to completeness rather than clarity to patient. We can find out in trial information how do they want to be contacted, How do they want to make contact back to the trial centre? What sort of appointment reminders do they want? Cards, online, email, text? And how will they find more information about the study? Do they want it online? Do they need other things? Do they prefer paper? Do they prefer online? Do they want a mix? Do we need to make sure that we match the needs of a variety and diversity of patients? And we've also asked patients in online communities about what sort of information they want around trial results. How do they want to access it? And in the creation of an online portal to give patients in trials access to their own study, the study results from the studies they participated in, we got patient input and they helped us simplify and make the online portal more accessible and more relevant to them. So really, to summarise the value of the online health communities, they're a great supplement to other sources of information that help inform the design of clinical trials. Obviously, we're not going to stop asking study nurses. We've also got our own patient panels who can give us advice. But they do give us rapid access to patients' views and priorities. They can be geographically diverse. We're not linked to a single site who will give us feedback. They allow quantitative surveys of large groups. Our largest survey was just over 400 patients. The survey wasn't intended to be that large, but the survey opened and patients were so keen to share their views that we got to 400. I think it was over 2 nights and couldn't be shut down fast enough. And you can get deeper insight through virtual interviews because of the online communities giving us a pool of patients that we can invite to take part in these. But there are limitations. No physician confirmation of diagnosis. This is patient reported. We don't know to what extent patients are representative of this disease. Do patients who join online communities differ in a major way from otherwise similar patients? Do the demographics of the disease match online communities? For a paediatric condition, it's only carers who are going to be on the online communities, and the very elderly also may be less engaged in online communities, and other ways to access their views will be needed. Online communities for rarer diseases do exist, but the numbers are low, and maybe there are better ways to access their views. And also, we work with patients like me, and we also have access to European communities, but they're not available for all languages and countries, and cultural differences between different countries will impact on what patients' preferences are around trial design, communication, and other support they're looking for. So in conclusion, working with online communities is a very important part of how we are increasing our patient centricity at AstraZeneca, and it forms a strong complement to other approaches. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kathy. That was really interesting and very informative. We've got a couple of questions have come in already. And I know we don't have a lot of time to address them, but the first question that's come in says, thank you for this. How do you address the issue of confidentiality in exit surveys of blinded trials?
We are setting that up at the moment, and the patients are invited to complete the survey online, but there's no direct connection with the patient in the study with the results they're giving around their experience of the study. So there's no direct connection back. AstraZeneca doesn't receive the information. It's held by patients like me who have no knowledge of where the study sites are. And we're breaking that connection. So theoretically it's pseudonymized, but it's a one-time survey. So we're working that through at the moment, but obviously confidentiality of patients is very important for those exit surveys where there is a clinical trial we're responsible for involved.
Okay, thank you. And actually an interesting question here. It says, how can smaller companies benefit? Obviously AstraZeneca is fortunate to have a department that can help with this sort of work, but companies that don't have the resources to have informatics departments, do patients like me provide a reasonable service to help with this?
Yes, they do. The informatics part of it, actually data crunching, they have internal experts, and running the surveys as well. They have a team who can help guide you through the process, identifying what are the key aspects of your study you need to test. Other companies also have this. I've worked relatively little with other companies, but all companies that do this sort of service of reaching out to patients and running surveys do support you. But it helps to have a clear idea of what you think the potential problems for patients might be in your study, to make sure you end up with a really focused survey that really gets to the answers you need.
Okay, thank you. There's lots of questions coming in. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. Maybe one more. Has the learnings from interacting with patients like me been discussed when discussing development programs with the regulatory authorities?
Yes. I'm aware of the general program being discussed with the FDA, I think it was last month, in terms of seeking patient insight. I know for one respiratory program that the insight to do with patients' willingness to complete PROs was part of the discussion with FDA. So yes, we are increasingly taking this into discussions, and the FDA in particular are very keen to hear what patient insights we have.
Excellent. And maybe just one last one. Do you have any idea of data on comparisons of attrition rates with trials planned using patient involvement as opposed to those not using patient involvement?
I'm afraid I don't. The studies we've been involved in haven't completed yet.
Okay.
So, but we will be looking at that with the caveat of knowing that no two studies are identical. So it will be not a pure analysis.
You'll need quite a few studies before you can start to look at that, probably.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kathy. There's a few more questions, but maybe I might find a way to get those to you at a later point or something and feed them back. But thank you for a really interesting and informative presentation. And so moving on then to our second speaker, Kathy, if you're able to change the presenter over to our next speaker, and whilst I introduce her, that would be great. So our next speaker is Professor Sue Pavit from the University of Leeds. Sue is a Professor in Applied Health and Translational Research and the head of the Dental Translational and Clinical Research Unit. Amongst other things, Sue is an academic representative for EUPATI, which is the European Patients Academy, and she's going to talk to us now about achieving effective patient public involvement in clinical trials. So I'll hand over to you, Sue, and we can see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the organisers for inviting me to come and talk to you today, and my focus is going to be about how to achieve effective patient public involvement in clinical trials, and our strapline is no research about us without us. So I'm going to speak very much from an academic perspective where I embed patient public involvement in all the research that's going on through my unit and have done for a number of years. So I'm going to give you some oversight as to the importance of doing this well, and some tips on how to achieve effective patient public involvement and engagement partnerships that enhance the relevance of the clinical research and the improved likelihood of delivering real tangible patient benefits. Okay, so the overview of my talk is going to be in two main areas, looking very much towards the first part is looking about research and the operational design to improve the delivery of clinical trials with increased likelihood of improved patient benefits, and then moving on to how do you actually get your patient population trained up and able to contribute well in a knowledgeable way, and also bearing in mind that your colleagues and academic colleagues or industrial partners also need to be trained to be able to maximise the what they get out of the engagement of the patients as well. So just going to the background, we're working really from an historical perspective where the public had a great distrust in clinical research, regarded it very much as a human guinea pig view of the world. But actually when you take people into Boots the chemist or any of the big pharmacists, many of those medicines or all of the medicines on the shelf have been brought there because they've undergone clinical research. And if we start to explain that to patients, they understand that actually it is a very pivotal piece of work to be involved in all the way through the research cycle. But we need to be mindful that they have busy lives, they're keen to to participate, but we need to make that process optimise, thinking about their how can we make it so that there's crashes and travel reimbursement, etc., for them to take part. Very much looking at the different levels of involvement that we can have in clinical research with patients. It's very much been growing momentum and changing previously held negative beliefs about research. PPIE is an excellent vehicle to forge links with local and regional patient communities who access treatment within the NHS and services. And there's very much a continuum now through engagement towards active involvement and even user control, where we've seen in some of the areas of mental health research, whereas actually the patients are actually leading the research agenda and sitting actually doing some of the interviews because they are schizophrenic patients themselves and have greater empathy to take part and glean the information that we need out of the research. There's a whole continuum of them being involved now. But what we're trying to do is adopt that patient-centric approach where the patient is put first, ensures that the treatments that we embrace are important to patients. And what we're really interested in is incorporating the patient lived experience of their condition, their treatment or their disease, and understanding the public perspective of the research in the design and delivery. And if we get those both right, we really are able to perform some enhanced research, and also they provide great insight to accelerate and disseminate and finally the adoption into clinical practice, which is all important. So what can public patient involvement engagement do for you and your companies? So when you're designing a clinical trial, we're often asking three major questions: why, when and how. But when we bring the patients in, it's what do patients think? We're asking very much the right question to improve the health and quality of lives for the patient. And one of the really good demonstrators of this is some work that I did in oral cancer, where we have a young gentleman here who's faced with a lesion on his tongue, and he's going to have that amputated. And the oncologist and surgeon are very much focused on the 5-year survival at any cost, but he's facing major disfigurement and having to wear a prosthesis, a facial prosthesis, for the rest of his life. And so his focus is, whilst he wants to survive, are also about the quality of life issues around his function and disfigurement. Is he ever going to be able to eat in public and have a sandwich again? How is he going to manage that? So that he can make an informed decision about the treatment options that are available to him. When we looked at the research that had been gone through the Cochrane systematic reviews, very few of them actually touched on the survival aspects and the quality of life. And those patients saw that as vitally important and started to shape that this research needed to be undertaken in a different way. We needed to think about the mode of delivery of the chemotherapy agents. These patients can't swallow after the surgery in the same way. We have to think about the size of the tablets, or whether in fact injectables are needed. And these might seem like very basic things, but if you don't get it right from the beginning, it really limits their comfort afterwards in terms of some of the analgesics that they may need to have in their daily life post-surgery. The convenience of the drug supplies, the packaging, the dispensing, the delivery, and also making sure that if they're feeling unwell or they can't go out because their prosthesis hasn't been made yet, can they use digital technology at home in order to capture the data that the clinical trialists need, because they can't be coming backs and forwards in the same way to the clinic at the frequency that you may have wanted them to. And if we get that right, the research is both more relevant to the patients, they're more likely to participate, and you get enhanced recruitment, adherence and retention within the trial, which is also important. It's not just about getting the people through the door, it's about maintaining them within your trial. That's also vitally important. So I'm going to talk about some of the situations that we've seen. So patient public involvement is very much about one window, and you can have two different views. So if you see this view, you'd be thinking you're going to just be going under the drill in a dental surgery, but actually it could be a very pleasant experience for you. So you need to understand both perspectives of what you're seeing. It's about developing up an ideal sales pitch so that the patients feel informed, they feel knowledgeable about what you're saying, and that what you want to work with them is relevant to them. And the informed consent and the choice of languages is a very important part of this. There was a very large NIHR funded trial, the PROTECT trial, looking at prostate cancer. And they noticed that the recruitment was very poor. It really wasn't going to plan at all. And they were looking at a delayed treatment arm that was described as watchful waiting. They did some qualitative research to really understand what was happening in this trial and why recruitment wasn't really going as well as it should have been, and decided from talking to the patients that they were actually interpreting watchful waiting as to watch while I die. And the patients indicated that if they changed that descriptor to active monitoring, that it would be much more seen as a favourable arm. And by doing that, they saw an increase in the recruitment rate almost overnight from 40%, where it had been lagging, immediately up to 70% of people coming into that trial. So a huge success for that. Now, you can't get more unsexy than a denture trial, but it's very important again that we bring that lived experience. I don't wear dentures. I can't understand all the aspects of wearing dentures if I'm designing a trial on it. So I needed to bring Carol and Shirley to the table to help me understand the lived experience of that, the social stigma of wearing dentures, that people often laugh, and the impact it has on their daily activities like eating and talking and laughing, and how poor-fitting dentures can really lower self-esteem and actually be very painful to the patients. They were brought in, they helped us review our trial literature, the patient information leaflets were much more understandable, and that immediately improved our ethics submissions, so as it went through at greater rapidity and needed no amendments at all when it went through. Furthermore, they were able to design a trial that was suitable for patients and the way that they wear dentures. Dr. Hyde, who is the dentist, had originally decided that he wanted a trial where they might be comparing two sets of dentures. Could they compare them half day wearing one, half day wearing another? And Carol explained that she never took her dentures out in public, and would not be acceptable to her. And so the trial had to be modified so that it was more participatory, friendly, and again, once that was fixed, then we had more people wanting to come in and take part in the trial. The operations and logistics of the trial is also important. These are elderly people. They tell us that they're coming in to have appointments using their bus passes, and that they were restricted to after the school run, usually between 10 and 3 p.m. was their ideal travelling time. And so we had to accommodate that if we ran our trial from 9 to 5, we were simply not going to get people turning up to appointments in the manner that we wanted them to, or would have scheduled them to in the clinical trial. So we had to adopt our main time of our appointments to meet our patients' requirements, and as a consequence for that, the patients said that they were less inconvenienced, there were fewer cancelled appointments, and the recruitment ran much closer to schedule. And this is some exciting work that we've been doing at the dental school now. Of basically at the end of a study, it's very important that we disseminate our research so that it gets to the audience where it matters the most. And we were working on some work with amelogenesis imperfecta, which is a condition where people have very brown and discoloured teeth that are very painful, that actually mimic how people have when they have dental caries and tooth decay. And this is very prevalent, the tooth decay in the Yorkshire region. 45% of our 12-year-olds have rotten teeth and have days off school with pain, and they have low self-esteem. It's very important, if any of you have got teenagers, you realise it's actually very difficult to tell them what to do. And so we wanted to explore a new way of getting our research message out from the dental school, out to these areas of social deprivation where we see the greatest health need in oral health. And so we decided to do a play and take that out to the schools. and this was an award-winning performance now from the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, gave it a national prize this year as a very innovative way to disseminate research. And we've had some added benefits that the participants at the school have actually wanted to undertake their own oral health research, and it's raised enormous awareness in the population locally at the school, and we're very proud of that innovative approach. So using patient public involvement in the trial brings those unique insights that only the patient can help us in terms of the challenges of the trial design, ensuring that the trial logistics are there, and that informed consent is done in a language and in a manner that enhances recruitment. We see superior delivery in terms of that we've designed the trials to answer the questions that are important to patients, and therefore they're much more likely to have improved patient outcomes, and as a consequence of that the trials appeal to the wider population, and we see greater recruitment, adherence and retention, and that means that we deliver a powered study where we can do the proper statistical analysis at the end and actually deliver improved benefits. And certainly for our pharmaceutical colleagues, there's improved market headroom sometimes from the work that we undertake. So if we get these operations correctly done, we've got this good trial design with the input of the patients, the trial operation logistics are there, and the trial literature itself describing the trial is simplified, we start to see a well-oiled clog where we get those patient insights that are very relevant for the evaluation, and they yield improved recruitment intention, and we get that delivery of the evidence-based medicine and improved health. But one of the biggest challenges is how do we access meaningful patient public involvement, and we just heard from Kathy a beautiful experience with people like me, patients like me, and now I'm just going to say something about some alternative ways that we do it within our practice. So we have, throughout our teaching hospital and university, we have a number of patient forums for special topic areas, and in dentistry we've got SmileAider, stakeholder meaningful involvement and engagement aiding dental research, where we have flyers like this in the dental hospital, and people can respond to say, yes, I'm interested, and they can come along to forums that are held at least 3 times a year, where all of our research from the academic and those where we're working with industry in partnership are reviewed, and we ask for the patient's input very early on and all the way through the research cycle. And the children or the adolescents that were involved in the Don't Smile play actually come in now and take part in the SmileAider PPI forum, providing us with the reach to the adolescent community from Black and minority ethnic community as well, so that we're not just dealing with a white Caucasian Women's Institute type of population. It really does represent our local community by having all ethnicities and ages present. So the other work that I want to move over to tell you about is some exciting work going on from the EU and coming to the UK as well. The European Patient Academy of Therapeutic Innovation, which is quite a mouthful, and we shorten it to EUPATI, where we've been delivering a paradigm shift in empowering patients and the public to understand the medicine development process so that they can take part meaningfully in PPI forums and contribute to research. It's very much a unique consortium in terms of it being a tripartite partnership between academia and pharmacy, sharing learned experiences and providing educational resources in there so that we can actually transform our patients to be truly experts who are equipped to come to the table and help us design our trials and feel valued at the table and know how to manage and work within that multidisciplinary team and not feel intimidated with a bunch of professors sitting around the table with them. It's very much about working together and we've done some research to look at why we needed EUPATI. In 2013, the consortium conducted a survey into public views on medicine research and development with over 7,000 individuals across Europe, and what we found was that there was a low general knowledge about medicine development, but there was a keenness to be involved, and they wanted to have better understanding, and they wanted that information delivered in a variety of ways to them. So EUPATI responded by trying to ascertain what the best means was to provide those training needs for the patient public involvement advisors, how to develop and disseminate the up-to-date public knowledge about medicines R&D, and build competencies and expert capacity among patients and the public to help facilitate R&D that collaborates with academics, industry, research authorities and the ethics committees in a meaningful way. And although the UK has always been a champion for patient public involvement, that isn't the case across Europe, and it's very patchy, with some countries having good representation and others just having virtually nothing there. With the infrastructures that the National Institute of Health Research and Involve have put in place in the UK that has mandated patient public involvement in clinical research, it's been a very effective way of bringing on our own patient public involvement in the UK. But this was an opportunity to work across Europe in a knowledge transfer capacity, and the top level educational targets were to develop 100 patient experts across 12 countries. The resources from the educational toolbox online is available in all these languages on there, and some other ones now have been added on, and a robust internet library of health related materials that are valuable to individuals who might be needing to understand more about randomization or other aspects of clinical trial design. They can go and look up a glossary and get information to help them do their job better. 2 courses have been completed and a third has been recently launched. EUPATI itself was funded by IMI, and that initial funding has now come to an end, but the work is continuing and Patient Forum has taken over the work. If you Google EUPATI and get to the website, there's a multitude of slideshows, videos, webinars and resources that are useful for you in your companies and in academia to work with patients to help inform them and put on educational programs for them. The training course itself was quite onerous. It was a fantastic program, 175 hours of online learning, 8 days of face-to-face meetings, and took place over 14 months. The resources for that are now available online, but primarily the topics that were covered cover the range of the clinical trial research cycle and inform the patients and provided a fantastic knowledge base for them to work then with industry and academia and do work. And this is one of our own fellows from EUPATI, Maria Pegan from England, who says, "I have been provided with tools which give me confidence to assert the patient voice. Each process examined highlights how a patient advocate can add value." These are our fellows graduating, and they're already starting to see an increase of their uptake into the pharmaceutical companies, into regulatory agencies, and to health technology advisory bodies that are taking up their work as well. In UK, we have EUPATI has spread out national platforms in a number of countries, and EUPATI UK has a very vibrant community. We have a number of our fellows who were trained. We have approaching 20 fellows in the UK who are available as specialists to help within your research areas and help train up your peer-to-peer support for your patient involvement reps that might be in your own organisations that need to be upskilled. The EUPATI UK is led by Irene Oldfather, who is a patient partner, Kay Warner from GSK, and myself and Suzanne Parsons from Manchester, who are the academic leads, very much keeping that tripartite partnership between us all. And here's a picture of our fellows. We held every 2 years to date, we've had a conference, and the last one was held on Brexit Day, unfortunately, but nonetheless we had a good turnout, and was held at the Royal College of General Practitioners in London, and was able to be in partnership with the ABPI. We were able to discuss all the training needs of them, and also at that point we were demonstrating the UPATI toolbox and showing people how to access it, use it, and what type of information they could get out of it, and highlighting that the toolbox provides a multitude of dashboards, infographics, presentations and fact sheets that they can use within their own practice and to enhance their delivery. So if we get this right, we very much are working together, pulling together in that coherence, excellence and innovation framework, and we believe that that is really building these effective partnerships across the tripartite of patients, industry and academia brings great strengths to us all. And if we pull together, we're able to foster new partnerships and bring new opportunities. And hopefully that will have given you some insight into the approaches that I use on an everyday basis of embedding patient-public involvement in my work, and also using UPATI as a resource. Anyone can join UPATI UK, and we would welcome you signing up, and you can get more information from the website, or you can contact me directly. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Again, that was a really informative and helpful talk. We have a few minutes for questions, so I haven't seen any come through just yet, but please do type any questions into the questions box. And whilst we're waiting for those to start coming through, maybe I'll start off, Sue. One of the things that occurred to me was, particularly at the beginning of your talk, when you were talking about how you know, you were designing your denture trial, and you went and you talked to your two patients who gave you some useful insight into what was practical for them. There may be people on this call who work for smaller companies doing clinical trials, where they might be thinking, well, this would be really useful. We're designing this trial, and it would be really useful to know what patients might think of this. They may not, you know, they may not have the resources of a larger company like AstraZeneca, for example. How would they actually go about finding some patients to help them with the design of their trial?
So I think coming into academia is often quite a good way. Companies often have clinicians that they're working with. Those clinicians often work at the interface of the hospital and academia, and most of the universities will have good access to people who are doing patient-public involvement and forums that they can tap into. And so really it's a case of them asking, and most people will be more than helpful in trying to get their patient voice to enhance the research, because fundamentally that's what we all want. We want the research to be better, a better experience for the patients.
And so would UPATI be a way of getting that engagement going through UPATI, or should they be approaching people? No,
I think UPATI UK is an excellent way. They can sign up. We often get requests to help with research. We broker that out to our fellows that we have in UPATI, and they can guide in terms of if they have the expertise themselves, they'll take it on. Sometimes they go to their colleagues across Europe for that support, and they have a local network. Quite a few of them work in charities themselves, and Irene Oldfather works for an umbrella charitable organisation in Scotland that oversees about 200 charities. So again, she's got a wealth of contacts and information, so she can access you to the right people in the right area that you need to get in your companies, and we're more than happy to do that.
Excellent, thank you. And another question. What's your sense of how patients feel about this opportunity to be involved more in the trials that are being done?
So I think our patients absolutely love to be heard, and that we are taking an interest in what matters to them. it's very refreshing for them to have their voice valued, and they are always more than willing to provide just a rich resource of information. And I'm always surprised really by just how much detail and thought they put into their responses. They review all our clinical research here in my department. No research happens without their voice being central to it, and they always bring added value and new thoughts of how we should do things or access patients in the right way. And I think many of them are just pleased to be able to give back. They've had good experiences within the NHS. They're appreciative of the drugs that they have and the treatments, and they love to play a part to make that an enhanced experience for the next patients that are coming through.
That's really good. And do they get any reimbursement of expenses, or do they get paid for their time and their input? How does that work?
Yeah. So I think it's very important that they are adequately reimbursed. So we follow the Involve guidelines, which works on a minimum of £150 pro rata per day. So in our funded research, they will be built into our grant applications to be reimbursed at that level. But in our preparatory work, where they're coming into the forum, from the Smile Ada forum, then we don't have the resources to pay them all at that rate because it's not funded research at that stage, and they give their time generously, and we reimburse them for their travel on the day and provide lunch and refreshments for the time that they're there. And a modest reimbursement fee is sometimes achievable within some parts of the organisation. But it's not at the Involve rate for that work.
Sure.
But we're working on that to try and make it so that you know, they're giving up their time just like we are getting paid to do our work, and making sure that they feel valued and that they can be suitably reimbursed for their time.
Excellent. So I don't think there's any more questions. So I'd just like to say thanks again to you, Sue, for a very interesting presentation, and it's really helpful to get the sort of academic input as well as the talk from Kathy, and it was Kathy's had to leave us unfortunately, but a really interesting talk from her as well. So thank you to both of you very much for your time today and for the presentations that you've given us, and I'll draw the webinar to a close.